the free will of man not just an illusion?
All of us possess an intuitive certainty that I think. It is I who think. And it's also I who speak. And also it's I who act. So intuitively, we all think we're doing what we want to do. Or we're thinking what we want to think. Or we say what we want to say. It's not something forced upon us. So that indicates that from the point of view of intuition, a man is free. Also, we all possess a sense of achievement. If we've made a good speech, given a good shiuur, given a good talk, or if we've produced a work of art or literature, we feel that we've achieved something. And if we fail, we feel frustration. As was already declared, there was never yet a philosopher who didn't push at chance and sufferance, however much they would write the style of gods. The deterministic thinker, he still has a feeling of personal achievement in the publication of a thought system, where everything is causally determined, where there's no place for personal achievement. I personally know of someone who attended a philosophical course by one of the greatest philosophers of today, who regarded freedom as a complete illusion, and this student argued a great deal with this lecturer. So the lecturer called him into his office and said, "Why do you keep on arguing with me?" Because some of the class joined in with my point of view. And so I said to him, according to your theory, or he said to him, according to your theory, the person is predetermined and can't help it if you ask questions, because you say nobody's free. That means in his criticism of you, he is surely not free at all. You can't blame him. So of course the lecturer got more upset. So we also know without freedom we cannot really accuse anyone of sinning, because he can't help it. Even the biggest criminal is causally preconditioned to go and work out without having any freedom to resist, to work out his criminality and his cruelty. So there's no such thing as sin or virtue. There's no such thing as penitence. And all crime has to be regarded just like a mental illness. No difference. You can't distinguish between a lunatic and someone who commits cruel murder whilst in a sane state of mind. Because just like the first one, he is here being conditioned by a severe illness of his mind. The criminal is similarly conditioned by a severe condition of criminality which he can't help.
What's the biblical attitude?
What is the attitude of the Bible to the question of freedom? Well, the Bible is filled with commands, prohibitions, reward and punishment, and a call for penitence. None of these have any meaning whatsoever if the person isn't free. You see, freedom is the basis. As it already expressed concerning Adam, where God said, "Behold, the man Adam has become like one who from himself knows good and evil." He has a knowledge, and that's why he was punished, of evil as well as good. Because he transgressed a prohibition, he was driven out of paradise. We see that the sons of Adam, Cain and Hevel, when Cain murdered Hevel, so God says to him, and this in response to Cain's claim, if you, God, would not permit me to kill him, I wouldn't be able to kill him. So, it's not my fault. It's your fault, Cain said to God. So God said to him, oh no, it isn't so. You've been put into this world to make a choice, to help people to live, or even to kill and murder. And you have to recognize that if you will try to serve God and pursue virtue, then you'll be accepted by God. If you do not, then sin, evil, crouches at the door of your heart, the power of sin, and it tempts you, but it tempts you in order that you should be able to control it, because you're put into this world for a test. Whether you're going to follow vice or virtue, it's entirely up to you, as it says further in the Bible. See, I have set before you this day life and that which is good and virtuous, and death, that which is evil. Although a person may do evil and still survive, live for a certain time, but he cannot gain eternal life except through the pursuit of virtue. And as is written by Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, it is true, out of the mouth Most High, both good and evil do not come. That means God gives good. He gives the potential of evil. So man complains and says, why do I have evil? The answer is, a living man has the opportunity to overcome the evil. The evil is sent so that you should grow in virtue, because if there would be no potential or possibility of doing evil, there'd be no virtue in doing good. A person couldn't help it. He would be a robot. So therefore a person only has himself to blame if he gets punishment for his sins.
Doesn't God control the behavior of man?
On the one hand, the Bible emphasizes the freedom of man. On the other hand, it teaches us that God is in control. He is omnipotent. Whatever God wishes, He does in heaven, on earth, in every place of the world. And since He controls everything, this is what is expressed. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moveth on, nor all thy piety and wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. So this is a great paradox. How can man have freedom if God is the master of fate and destiny? We can say to some extent, this paradox illustrates the different approaches to life between the West and the East. The West's tendency is to go in the direction of the pragmatic power of man, how man is able, through his own skill and power and mind, to control his life and to control this planet, and today also to try to control the other planets. The Eastern world tends more in the direction of either faith in the gods or in one God, or in the inner spirit of the universe, that's what controls life. But the answer to this question is given in the verse which says, "What does God require of you but to fear God with all your heart and with all your soul?" Which is expounded by our sages. Everything is in the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven. Which means, in the moral sphere, because the fear of heaven includes all aspects of virtue, there a person has freedom. As it is graphically described by the sages, that before a baby is born, it is already decided in heaven whether this person in her life is going to be strong or weak, rich or poor, wise or foolish. That is predetermined. But whether that person is going to be a saint or a sinner is left entirely to the person himself. Which means that it is true, wise or foolish, wealth and strength are tools which are used by human beings. The tools are given, are predestined. But what a person will do with them, there he has complete freedom. So, this is a concept which is referred to by the Kabbalists as a limiting of the divine presence. How can we understand it? The answer is, just as God has the wish that the laws of nature should apply to the mineral, vegetable and animal world and to the physical aspects of human existence, so it is also the wish of God that man should be free. In order that man, with his unique soul, which is a power given by God, should be able to develop his spiritual and moral potential, which is only possible if he's given freedom.
If God has foreknowledge of the deeds of man, how can he be free?
Here we have the paradox referred to by the sages with the words, everything is foreseen, and yet freedom of will is given. And this is expressed in the verse of Psalms, that God looks down from heaven, he sees all the sons of man. From the place of his dwelling he looks upon all the inhabitants of the earth. He who fashions their hearts together, he considers all their deeds. The deeper concept expressed here is that God has created the universe of space and time, and human beings live within the limitations of the dimensions of space and time. And therefore for us, there's a difference between our experience of the past, which comes through memory, our experience of the present, which comes through immediate sensation of perception, and our awareness of the future, which is not clear to us. We know, though, that human beings can sometimes get a premonition of what might happen in the future. They can sometimes predict certain things with great plausibility, not with complete certainty. And we know that a prophet is able even to foretell exactly what will happen in the future. That means the mind generally, the conscious mind, is definitely limited by time. The subconscious mind can sometimes enter into a dimension which is a little above time. We all of us can know what happened in the past by looking at film of what happened then. If we see in the film of the past different human beings acting in various ways, we don't control their actions at all. That means knowledge of what happens, what human beings do, is not controlled by, but it does not mean that we control their actions. Knowing what happened doesn't control their actions. So a prophet, or let us say, if we were able to travel in a time machine into the future, which is quite possible with the development of fiction, of science fiction being transformed into science fact. So if we would go into a machine whereby we would travel into the future and then come back, then we would also be able to know what happens in the future without controlling it. So the mind of God is beyond time. And prophets, let's say their mind, their inner soul reaches near to God so they can get a communication from God, does not mean they control it. And God himself also doesn't control it, although he knows. This is expressed in the words of this psalm, where it says, "He who creates their hearts together." What does it mean together? God is the creator of the mind, of all the minds of human beings, and is able to see what they do from beyond time, which is really a telescoping of past, present, and future. He sees them all together because he's above time. Therefore, it's not difficult to understand that everything should be foreseen by God above. We can give a simple illustration, even from our experience. A person is traveling in a car along a road, and he doesn't quite know all the turnings into which his car will go. But if there's an aeroplane above, the aeroplane above knows exactly where that car is going to go. And that's why today drivers can have a satellite giving the directions of what lies ahead. It means the aeroplane is above, it's on high dimension. Therefore, from the aeroplane, one can easily see where this car is going to go. So God knows. He can see, not only sees the streets, he sees also the future as the present. Therefore, he can see what's going to happen when that car or when that person carries on in life, what he's going to do, although he gives them complete freedom to choose one way or another way. Isaiah says, in the name of God, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This is the similar concept. Because God is the master of all space, therefore, we are limited, generally speaking, by time and space. So just as the hand cannot grasp thought and speech, so the normal human mind cannot grasp God.
Does the law of causality not contradict free will?
It would appear that in life, everything that happens, all effects have a cause. However, we should realize that today it is recognized even in science that there's a random element. Although there's a principle of cause and effect that applies in the wider happenings of the world and of nature, but there's also an element of indeterminism. today it's understood not as it was in an early age when scientists dreamt that it was theoretically possible to foretell all happenings, including human behavior, from known causes, which would produce known effects. But today, to quote the leading philosopher Popper of the philosophy of science, the old scientific ideal of absolute certain, demonstrable knowledge has proved to be an idol. Laws of science are today regarded as hypotheses, including the law of causality. We know it's still popularly assumed to operate even in the sphere of psychology and sociology, according to which the actions and thoughts of man are determined by antecedent causes. If we accept this principle absolutely, then also applies to the thinking of the scientists, which is also determined by chance, biological or sociological factors, and therefore loses its claim to truth. This is quite apart from what Edison says, that we should beware of imposing our intuitive a priori principles which desire to connect all the data of the universe upon the empirical world. And the philosopher Hume, where he said it's generally assumed succession of facts prove relationship, but they don't necessarily. So these are all developments in modern science which destroy the basis for the law of causality applying to all areas, especially to the area of human behavior, which is known to be unpredictable. In other words, to contrast and take the ground away from the application of determinism. Despite these factors, we do seem to experience causality in an outward limited fashion. So the truth is that there are certain inner perceptions, such as the perception of the ego, and also abstract perceptions, which cannot be denied. So just the existence of the ego, although it's not an object of sense perception, it's a fact. In fact, it's the subject of all perceiving, so free choice, which is an inward consciousness, cannot be denied, although it seems apparent to the causal view. So we have really two approaches whereby we can analyze human behavior. One from inside we're free. One from outside, which we frequently see causal connections. That means a person behaves according to the way in which he was brought up, according to the influences of heredity and environment. On the other hand, a person, when he acts, he feels he's got freedom. So it would appear that both aspects are true, although they seem to be paradoxical. So many philosophers, including scientists like Whitehead, have adopted the view. In science also, there's what's known as the principle of complementarity, which is based upon the quantum theory. Basic energy and light, through detailed analysis, has shown itself to have properties which can be described as particles, but also as properties which are waves in an ether. And logically they can't be both. But empirically it's been proven they are both. So there's been set up this principle that there are opposing phenomena in nature which complement one another, although they're a paradox. That means we do live in a world, even in the world of physical nature, where there are paradoxes. certainly in human behavior there's a paradox. That frequently you can trace back the behavior of a person to antecedent causes. On the other, from inside, the person knows, I'm acting as a free agent. This is partly described by the sages when they say, everything's the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven. That means the way in which we are able to have the tools to follow our own decisions, that is to some extent predetermined, both by God, and God works also through causality. But what we do with it, that's our own inner decision. That comes from inside, where a person says, it's I who am thinking. Or maybe thoughts come into my mind, which come from other causes, or come from indirectly from God. And there are influences around me. But the way I direct my thought, and the way I direct my speech, the way I direct my actions and my possessions, it's my action. It means this is the concept of how to balance these two principles that both seem to be true. So we can say like this, that the freedom of man teaches us that we are responsible, ultimately. So it teaches us moral responsibility. Causality also has its purpose, because through causality we're able to always go back and find out what is the first cause. Through the principle of causality we can find the first cause of the universe. That means the Creator. If we try to analyze more deeply what are the parameters of the freedom of choice of man, then we take an example of a person who is a kleptomaniac. That means he's got a sickness even of picking up things that belong to other people. It will be analyzed in such by a psychiatrist that he's sick. Maybe he's a kleptomaniac, comes from a family of kleptomaniacs, comes from a family of robbers. So the legal system, as well as those who try to improve the morality of mankind, will admit this person has no freedom. He needs to be cured. But he does the same action as is done by a person when he steals something that doesn't belong to him. So where is the line to be drawn between freedom and where we would say a person, in Jewish law as well as in most legal systems, is considered to be mentally ill, when he's considered to be a criminal? So, in the deeper analysis of the sages of Israel, there is a clear distinction made. That we can call it, there's a difference between potential freedom and actual freedom. Potential freedom, all human beings have in the area of morality. But also even the area of coming near to God. But it's limited by the range of knowledge. If they have a range of knowledge, which includes a knowledge of good and evil, then, all according to the knowledge that they have, there are certain areas where they never had the freedom, or if they did have the freedom, they lose the freedom. There's the illustrations of this in the Bible, where a person is considered guilty up to a certain extent, other cases where he's considered not guilty because he didn't have the freedom or didn't have the knowledge. So we have to draw a line as follows, that the process of freedom of choice is to recognize or to hide from that which one really knows to be true. For example, today, most of us sitting here are conditioned by our heredity, by environment, by upbringing, not to murder and not to rob and rape. So it's not really a free act to us if not to murder. It's easy. It's something which is part of our habitual lifestyle, which we couldn't change. But where do we have? We also don't have freedom to reach the level of the greatest saints and prophets. That's beyond our range. We have freedom where there's a balance of forces, where there's a temptation. This is illustrated by the situation of Adam before he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and after he ate the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, on which the question is asked that if Adam, before he ate from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, had no knowledge of good and evil, so what evil did he commit? He had no freedom. He didn't know the difference between the two. So he must have been free. And in fact, the essence of the creation of man is in the first chapters of the Bible, where it says that God breathed into man the soul of life, which means he gave man freedom. He gave man an ego which is free, a spiritual power through which he can free himself from just following his instincts. That's the power that was given to man. So therefore, what was added to status of his heart and mind when he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So the answer is, knowledge of good and evil is experiencing evil. Before he also knew the difference. In his mind he knew there were evil things in the world. There were evil temptations. But they hadn't become part of his own nature. It was only a part of his conscience. He had a conscience, so he knew what was right and what was wrong, but he hadn't experienced evil. Once a person experienced evil, then he's faced with temptations. And if he gives in to the temptation again and again, he can lose his freedom. So we see from here that there are different levels for each individual. For example, a habitual smoker, knowing that it's ruining his health, he chooses for the good when he accepts this truth, and for the bad when his ego ignores this truth and gives room to the false desire to smoke. Though its potential extends further, the actual plane of free choice is the meeting point of evil and good inclinations at different levels for each individual. But it's man's freedom of choice which makes him into the image of God. Man has been granted liberty in order to avoid license. License also means doing whatever you want. But when a person enters into license, then he's abusing his power of freedom. He's using the power of freedom to enter into vice. When he uses his power of freedom, his choice, to enter into virtue, then he transforms the license into liberty and perfects himself and perfects the world. This gives meaning to commandments and prohibitions, to reward and punishment and human responsibility, and also gives hope that mankind indeed will recognize its responsibility. If a person thinks, I'm not responsible, then it's very difficult for him to control his evil instincts. This concept of the meeting point between the two powers of good and evil, where a person has true freedom, is very important also in dealing with addictions. If a person, when he's got an addiction to something evil, compulsive gambling or compulsive smoking of drugs, and he thinks to himself, I can't help it. It's my nature. It's my nature to have to keep on taking drugs. It's my nature to keep on gambling. What can I do about it? Then that person, he's in the hands of the evil power. What we have to teach people is that you're underneath, you're a responsible person, and you yourself, your inner ego, has the power to transform yourself. We need help. We just try to take help from everyone. But we've got to know, ultimately, we've got to make the choice ourselves. And the phrase which is so important today for each individual and for each nation and for the whole of mankind, because it's becoming literally fulfilled, is, see, I set before you today virtue and life and vice and death. It does not only refer to the world to come, it also refers to this world, because if the moral values based upon the inner freedom of mankind will not be emphasized in all parts of the world, then today we face an enormous crisis if we allow the powers of evil and hate and destruction and greed to take over the lifestyles of mankind. It's leading to death. And this is one of the important lessons of the nuclear crisis, of the ecological crisis, and also the crisis of health, physical health, mental health, and moral health, which faces mankind. If we will choose, each one of us, and each one of us a part of mankind, to spread the teachings of true freedom, which comes through adhering to a code of ethics based on the Bible, that will bring about the true freedom of mankind.